You lock your car door at a red light. You don't make eye contact on the subway. A stranger says hello on the street, and your first thought isn't curiosity. It's caution. What do they want? This feels like common sense. It feels like something humans have always done, a survival instinct passed down since the beginning. But it isn't. For most of human history, the opposite was true. Strangers weren't a threat to be managed. They were a resource to be welcomed. And the reason why will completely change how you think about trust.
Picture a small group of early humans, maybe 20 or 30 people, moving across a landscape roughly 100,000 years ago. A lone traveler appears on the horizon, someone from a different group entirely, someone with a different accent, different markings, different tools. By modern instinct, you'd expect fear, defensiveness, a closing of ranks. Instead, in most documented hunter-gatherer societies, something else happened. The stranger was fed first, given water first, often given the best spot near the fire, welcomed before being questioned.
Why would anyone do that? Anthropologist Kim Hill spent years studying the Ache people of Paraguay and similar small-scale societies, and his research revealed something that upends the popular image of prehistoric life as a brutal every-group-for-itself struggle. Hill found that small hunter-gatherer bands were almost never self-sufficient.
They depended on a sprawling web of relationships with other bands, sometimes spanning hundreds of kilometers, when your own hunting territory failed, when disease swept through your camp, when a drought emptied the rivers. You didn't just suffer and die, you traveled to a different group. And they took you in. This wasn't charity, it was insurance. A stranger today might be your lifeline next season, so you treated every stranger as a future investment, not a present danger. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Hill's data suggested that in many of these societies, less than 10% of someone's social network was made up of close blood relatives. The vast majority of meaningful relationships were with people who weren't biologically related at all. Trading partners, marriage alliances across groups, friends made on long seasonal migrations. Humans built entire safety nets out of people who, by a narrow evolutionary logic, owed them nothing. Think about how strange that is. If survival of the fittest meant every organism is simply trying to pass on its own genes, why would early humans invest so heavily in people outside their bloodline? This is where things get interesting. Evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers proposed a concept that reshaped how scientists understood cooperation, something called reciprocal altruism. The idea is simple but radical. Helping a non-relative isn't a betrayal of your genetic interests, as long as the favor is likely to be returned someday. Trivers showed mathematically that in small, repeated interaction societies, where you'll keep running into the same people over years and decades, generosity towards strangers can actually be the more successful long-term strategy than hoarding and suspicion. In a small band, everyone knows everyone. Reputation travels fast. If you help the lost traveler today, that traveler remembers. Their group remembers. Word spreads. You haven't just fed one hungry person. You've made a deposit in a social bank that the entire region can see. Now compare that to your life today. You live among thousands, sometimes millions of people you will never see again. The stranger who needs help on the street corner is, statistically, someone you will likely never encounter twice. There's no long-term relationship to invest in, no reputation system tracking your kindness across a small interconnected web. The mathematics that made trust rational for your ancestors has, for you, almost completely dissolved. This is what researchers call the anonymity problem of modern life. Sociologist Georg Simmel wrote about this over a century ago, describing how city life forces humans to interact with countless strangers they'll never see again, creating what he called a kind of protective indifference. Your brain, faced with thousands of fleeting interactions every single day, can't run the ancient reciprocity calculations it evolved to run, so it defaults to caution. Not because humans became worse, because the environment stopped rewarding the math that made trust pay off. There's something almost tragic in this. The instinct that made your ancestors generous toward strangers, the deep evolved sense that today's outsider could be tomorrow's ally, hasn't disappeared. It's still wired into you. But it's running in a world of 7 billion people where the feedback loop that made it work has been severed. You can see the ghost of this old instinct flicker in small moments. The stranger who helps you change a tire on the highway, the neighbor you've never spoken to who shovels your walkway during a snowstorm, the wave of collective generosity that appears after a disaster, when suddenly, for a brief window, the old logic seems to switch back on, and 100 strangers will line up to help people they'll likely never meet again. That's not an aberration. That's the ancient system trying to reassert itself, briefly remembering what it was built for. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy has argued that this capacity for trust toward non-kin might be one of the most important, underappreciated traits in the entire story of human evolution. Other primates almost never tolerate strangers this way. A troop of chimpanzees encountering an unfamiliar chimp will often respond with violence, sometimes lethal violence. Humans are the rare exception. The species that looked at an unfamiliar face and, more often than not, across tens of thousands of years and thousands of different cultures, chose curiosity over aggression. That capacity might be the single biggest reason your species spread across every continent on Earth. Trust between strangers let early humans share knowledge, trade resources, intermarry, and survive disasters no single small group could survive alone. The willingness to extend goodwill to someone who shared none of your blood is, by some reasonable measures, one of the most successful evolutionary strategies humans ever developed. So the next time you instinctively avoid eye contact with a stranger or grip your bag a little tighter, walking past someone you don't recognize, it's worth remembering what that instinct used to look like 10,000 generations ago. It used to look like welcome. It used to look like sharing your fire with someone who might one day, when your own group is the one in crisis, share theirs with you. You didn't lose that capacity. It's still inside you, the same ancient wiring, the same evolved willingness to bet on strangers. It's just waiting for a world that makes that bet worth taking again.